I'm Grace Harper, 28 years old, and I will never forget the moment I limped into that Denver courtroom, the sound of my crutches echoing against the polished floor. My heart pounded as I faced my family sitting there smugly thinking they had already won. But their eyes widened when they saw me alive standing tall despite the pain shooting through my leg. Yet it was the woman beside me who made my father leap from his seat, his face pale as he shouted, "Oh my God, it's her." The entire room froze. They thought they had buried my future in that hospital bed where I was left alone in a coma, abandoned as if I was nothing. They believed they could steal everything I had worked for, a $10 million contract, my life's achievement. But they were wrong. If it were you, would you make them pay or give them a chance to make things right? Comment below, and let's debate. It all started months before that courtroom showdown. I'd just walked out of a sleek Denver office tower, my hands trembling as I clutched the signed contract. $10 million. My AI algorithm, a breakthrough in medical diagnostics, had landed me a deal with a major healthcare corporation. Years of late nights, endless coding, and pushing past doubts had paid off. I was 28, a software engineer at the top of my game, and I couldn't wait to share the news with my family. I drove to our suburban home, my heart racing with pride, imagining their faces lighting up. I was wrong. When I stepped through the front door, my sister was there, sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes narrowed. She was 32, a project manager at my company, always polished, always in control. But that day, something was off. I held up the contract, grinning, and said I did it. $10 million for my algorithm. Her lips twitched, not into a smile but a grimace. "Your algorithm?" she snapped. "You mean the one I've been overseeing? The one I push through meetings?" Her voice dripped with venom and I froze. I'd always known she was competitive. Always the golden child who got our parents' praise while I scrapped for scraps of approval. But this was different. This was rage. I tried to explain that the algorithm was my work, my code, my sleepless nights. She stood her chair, scraping the floor, and stepped closer. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" she hissed. I backed away, my hands raised, trying to calm her. "This isn't about you," I said, my voice shaking, but she wasn't listening. We were at the top of the stairs now, arguing, her face inches from mine. "You're nothing without me," she spat, and then in a flash her hands shoved my shoulders. I stumbled, my foot catching air, and the world spun as I fell. Pain exploded in my head, my body crashing down the wooden steps, and then darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed, the beeping of machines filling the silence. My head throbbed, my leg ached, and a nurse's voice cut through the fog. "You're awake?" she said softly. I blinked, trying to piece it together. "How long?" I croaked. 2 weeks, she replied, her eyes kind but guarded. 2 weeks in a coma. I asked about my family, my sister, my parents. The nurse hesitated, then said, "No one's been here. Your parents called once early on, but they haven't come." My chest tightened. I'd expected my sister to stay away after what she'd done, but my parents. I thought of my father, always distant, and my mother always siding with her favorite daughter. Did they say anything? I asked, dreading the answer. The nurse looked away. "They said you brought this on yourself, that you shamed them." I lay there staring at the ceiling, the words cutting deeper than the fall. My own parents dismissing me like I was nothing. I thought back to the contract, my moment of triumph, now tainted by my sister's jealousy. She hadn't just pushed me down the stairs, she'd tried to erase me. And my parents, the people who should have been at my bedside praying for me, had turned their backs. I clenched my fists, the pain in my body nothing compared to the betrayal in my heart. As days dragged on, my isolation grew heavier. The hospital room felt like a cage, its walls closing in as I lay there, my body aching from the fall. No one from my family showed up, not my parents, not my sister. I kept glancing at the door, hoping for someone to care, but it stayed shut. The nurses moved quietly, their routines a blur, and I was left alone with my thoughts replaying the sting of my family's betrayal. I'd always been the outsider in their eyes, overshadowed by my sister's charm, but their absence now cut deeper than ever. I wondered if they even knew I was awake, or if they simply didn't care. One morning, my sister appeared without warning. She stood at the edge of my bed, her arms folded, a smirk twisting her face. "Still clinging to life, huh?" she said, her voice sharp and cold. "You're holding everyone back, you know." Pain flared in my leg as I tried to shift, glaring at her. "Why are you here?" I asked, my throat tight. She leaned closer, her eyes glinting. "Just making sure you stay out of my way," she said, then straightened up and walked out, her footsteps echoing. Her words weren't just cruel, they carried a weight like she was guarding a secret. I clenched the bedsheet, my anger simmering. She wasn't just mocking me, she was up to something. Later that week, my best friend slipped into the room, her face drawn with worry. She hugged me gently, careful not to jostle my injuries, and sat beside me. "I've been fighting to see you," she said, her voice low. "The hospital kept me away until now." I felt a rush of relief, her presence a lifeline in this lonely place. Then she dropped a bomb. "Your sister's been talking at work," she said, her eyes narrowing. "She's telling everyone she's taking over your $10 million contract, acting like it's hers." My stomach churned. My algorithm, the one I'd built from scratch, was being claimed by her. She's saying she's the one who made it all happen. My best friend added, her voice tight with disgust. The realization hit hard. My sister wasn't just gloating, she was trying to steal my legacy. That night, I grabbed my phone, wincing as my fingers fumbled with the screen. I needed to check my bank account, hoping to cover some hospital costs and regain a shred of control. The app loaded and a red alert flashed, "Account frozen." My heart pounded. I called the bank, my voice shaking, and the representative's words chilled me. "A court order froze your funds," she said. "It cites concerns about your ability to manage them." Ability. I'd just woken from a coma fighting to survive, and someone was trying to paint me as incompetent. My sister's visit, her smug confidence, and her boasts at work clicked into place. Everything was starting to make sense. This wasn't just abandonment. A week later, a stranger walked into my hospital room. He introduced himself as my lawyer, a man in his 30s with sharp eyes and a calm voice. He carried a thick folder, his expression serious as he sat beside my bed. "I'm here about your contract," he said, sliding a stack of papers toward me. My heart raced as I scanned the documents. They were legal forms, stamped and official, declaring me incapacitated, unable to manage my own affairs. My signature was scrawled at the bottom, but I'd never signed these. "These were filed to transfer your $10 million deal," he said, his tone steady but grim. "Someone's trying to take everything." I gripped the papers, my mind spinning. My sister's smirk from her hospital visit flashed in my head. This had her name all over it. I asked my lawyer how he'd found me. He explained that a colleague at my company, worried about my absence, had hired him to investigate. "The court order freezing your bank account was just the start," he said, flipping to another page. "These documents claim you're unfit to work based on your medical records." I stared at him, disbelief turning to dread. My medical records? I'd barely been awake a week, and someone was already rewriting my story. My lawyer leaned forward, his voice low. "We need to dig deeper, but this looks deliberate." I nodded, my anger rising. My sister wasn't just stealing my contract, she was trying to erase my competence, my identity. That afternoon, a doctor came to see me. She was in her 40s, her face kind but resolute, and she introduced herself as the one who'd overseen my care. "I found something troubling," she said, pulling up my chart on a tablet. "Your medical records were altered after you were admitted." My breath caught. She pointed to entries showing extended sedation and exaggerated neurological issues, none of which matched my recovery. "Someone added these to make it look like you'd never wake up," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "It's why the court order went through so fast." I felt a chill. This wasn't just about money. It was about keeping me out of the picture permanently. As I lay there, the pieces started to connect. My sister had always been controlling ever since we were kids. I remembered her at 6 snatching my favorite doll and claiming it as hers, smirking as our parents praised her for being assertive. By 10, she'd mastered turning their attention away from me, convincing them I was the problem whenever I spoke up. As teenagers, she'd manipulate every family decision from vacation plans to who got the bigger room, always painting me as the selfish one. My parents never questioned her. They adored her confidence, her charm. I'd spent years trying to prove myself, building my AI algorithm to show I was more than her shadow. But now she'd taken it to a new level, orchestrating a plan to strip me of everything I'd earned. I looked at my lawyer, then at the doctor, their faces steady with determination. They believed in me even when my own family didn't. The forged documents, the altered records, it was all my sister's doing with my parents, likely turning a blind eye as always. I thought of her boasts at work, her cruel words in the hospital. She thought she'd won, that I'd stay broken. But she'd underestimated me. I handed the papers back to my lawyer, my voice firm. "We're fighting this," I said. He nodded, a spark in his eyes. The doctor promised to document every discrepancy in my records. I wasn't just fighting for my contract, I was fighting for my life. Determined to fight back, I took a bold step. Still weak, but fueled by anger, I checked out of the hospital against advice and arranged to meet my sister at a quiet Denver cafe. I tucked a small recorder in my pocket, my heart pounding as I limped through the door. She was already there, sipping coffee, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp. "You're up," she said, her tone mocking. "Didn't think you'd make it." I forced a smile, playing along, and asked about work. She leaned back, smirking. "The contract's moving forward," she said. "Someone had to step up since you're indisposed." I pressed her, keeping my voice casual. "You mean my contract?" Her laugh was cold. "It's mine now. You weren't going to make it happen from a hospital bed." I clenched my jaw, the recorder capturing every word. She'd just admitted her plan to steal my $10 million deal. Back in my temporary apartment, I met with a private investigator my lawyer had recommended. She was a woman in her late 30s, sharp and no-nonsense, with a knack for uncovering secrets. "I've been digging into your sister's finances," she said, spreading bank statements across the table. My breath caught as she pointed to a series of payments, large sums wired to a colleague at my company. "This man," she said, tapping a name, "received $10,000 from your sister's account." I recognized the name, a colleague who'd always been too eager to please her. "He's been forging company documents," she added, "making it look like your sister was the lead on your algorithm." My blood boiled. She wasn't just taking credit, she was paying to rewrite history. Later that day, my best friend called, her voice urgent. "I found something you need to see," she said, forwarding a chain of internal company emails. I opened them, my eyes scanning the screen. In one, my sister had written to our boss. "With Grace out, I'm stepping in to replace her. The contract's in good hands." Another email bragged about her vision for the algorithm, as if I'd never existed. My hands shook as I read her words, each one a betrayal. Cynthia's voice broke through my thoughts. "She's been planning this for weeks," she said. "Everyone at work thinks she's the hero." I thanked her, my resolve hardening. These emails were proof that my sister was trying to erase me from my own success. Determined to leave no stone unturned, I called the hospital's administration office. I'd been haunted by the doctor's warning about my altered medical records, and I needed answers. The administrator, a brisk woman, confirmed my suspicions after pulling my file. "There's evidence of unauthorized changes," she said, her voice tight. "Entries were added to exaggerate your condition, suggesting you'd be incapacitated for months." I asked who had access to my records. She hesitated, then admitted, "Only a few staff members, but we're investigating an external request that came through a legal channel." My mind flashed to my sister's connections, her ability to manipulate. This wasn't just about the contract. It was about keeping me down, locked away in a false narrative of frailty. With evidence in hand, I prepared for battle. I sat across from my lawyer in his Denver office, a cluttered space filled with legal books and case files. "We're building a strong case," he said, his voice steady. "We'll file a lawsuit in Denver court charging fraud and conspiracy to deprive you of your contract." I nodded, my fingers tracing the edge of the table, but my chest tightened. Going to court meant facing my family, the people who'd betrayed me, without a second thought. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "The recording is key," he said. "In Colorado, one-party consent is legal, so your cafe conversation with your sister is admissible." I exhaled, relieved that my risky move would hold up in court. He explained we'd present the recording alongside the emails my best friend had uncovered showing my sister's intent to steal my $10 million deal. "We'll also call the doctor who reviewed your medical records," he added. "Her testimony will prove the alterations were deliberate." I felt a surge of hope, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on me. This wasn't just about winning, it was about confronting the family I'd once trusted. Later that day, I met with the doctor in a hospital conference room. She sat across from me, her posture calm, but her expression serious. "I've prepared a detailed statement," she said, sliding a folder my way. "It confirms the unauthorized changes to your records entries added to exaggerate your coma and suggest permanent incapacity." I flipped through her notes, my heart racing. The evidence was clear. Someone had tried to paint me as helpless to justify stripping me of my rights. Dr. Price met my gaze. "I'll testify to every discrepancy," she said firmly. This wasn't an accident. Her words bolstered my resolve, but they also stirred a storm of emotions I'd buried deep. As I left the hospital, memories of my family's favoritism flooded back. I saw my sister at family dinners, always the center of attention, her stories earning my parents' smiles, while my achievements went unnoticed. I remembered the time I'd won a science fair at 15, only for my mother to praise my sister's art project instead. My father would nod along, dismissing my efforts as not practical. Their constant preference for her had pushed me to work harder to build my algorithm to prove I was enough. Now they'd sided with her again, letting her manipulate my life while I fought to survive. The pain of their rejection hit me like a wave, threatening to drown my courage. I stopped at a park near the courthouse, needing air. I sat on a bench, the cold biting through my coat, and let myself feel the hurt. I wasn't just fighting for my contract, I was fighting for the truth. For the years I'd spent proving myself. The day of the trial arrived, and I was ready. The Denver courtroom buzzed with tension as I sat beside my lawyer, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Daniel stood, his voice clear and commanding, addressing the judge. "We have undeniable evidence of a conspiracy to defraud my client." He began, presenting the recording from the cafe, where my sister admitted to stealing my $10 million contract. The audio played, her smug voice echoing through the room. "It's mine now." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Daniel followed with the forged company documents showing how my sister and a colleague had falsified records to claim my algorithm. I glanced at her across the room, her face pale but defiant. Next, Daniel introduced the bank statements revealing payments my sister had made to Mark, a colleague, who sat rigid in his seat. "These transactions prove collusion." Daniel said, his tone unwavering. He handed the judge a folder of emails my best friend had uncovered where my sister bragged about replacing me. The evidence was airtight, each piece stacking against her. Then the doctor took the stand. Dr. Price spoke calmly, her words precise. "The medical records were altered to exaggerate Ms. Harper's condition," she said, holding up charts. "False entries suggested permanent incapacity used to justify the court order against her." The judge's eyes narrowed, and I felt a spark of hope. The truth was unraveling. My sister stood to defend herself, her voice sharp but unsteady. I was protecting the company, she claimed, her eyes darting to the judge. Grace was unstable, unfit to lead. Her lies stung, but they crumbled under scrutiny. Mark followed, stammering through his defense. "I was just following orders," he said, avoiding my gaze. His weak excuse only deepened the judge's frown. I watched my parents in the gallery, their faces a mix of shock and denial. My mother clutched my father's arm, her lips trembling. My father stared ahead, his usual cold demeanor cracking. They'd enabled my sister for years, but now their complicity was laid bare. Daniel called me to testify. My heart pounded as I took the stand facing the room. I spoke of my algorithm, the years of work I'd poured into it, and the betrayal of being pushed down the stairs. I described waking in the hospital, abandoned by my family, and discovering their plot to strip me of everything. They thought I'd stay silent. I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. But I'm here for justice. The courtroom was silent, the weight of my words sinking in. My sister glared, her confidence fading. My parents looked away, unable to meet my eyes. For the first time, I felt the power shift. The judge deliberated, the minutes stretching like hours. Finally, she delivered her verdict. "The evidence is overwhelming," she said, her voice firm. "The defendant orchestrated a calculated scheme to defraud Ms. Harper of her intellectual property and financial rights." She sentenced my sister to 4 years in prison for fraud and conspiracy. Mark received 2 years for his role in forging documents. I exhaled, relief washing over me, but the judge wasn't done. As for the parents, she continued, their involvement in enabling this scheme warrants a civil lawsuit for damages. My mother gasped, burying her face in her hands. My father's shoulders slumped, his authority shattered. As the gavel struck, I felt a weight lift. The courtroom emptied, but I stayed, watching my family leave in disgrace. My sister's defiant mask had cracked, her eyes hollow. Mark shuffled out, head bowed. My parents, once so dismissive, now faced the consequences of their favoritism. I'd fought for my truth, and I'd won. The contract was mine again, my name restored. But more than that, I'd reclaimed my strength. I walked out of the courthouse, the Denver sky bright above me, ready to rebuild my life. With justice served, I began a new chapter. I stood in my new apartment, a small but bright space with windows overlooking the city skyline. The walls were bare, but they held promise, a fresh start, free from the shadows of my family's betrayal. I'd made the decision to cut all ties with them. No more calls, no more visits, no more hoping for their approval. My sister, my parents, they were part of a past I no longer needed. The freedom of that choice felt like breathing for the first time in years. The legal consequences had been severe. My sister was serving a 4-year prison sentence, her ambition reduced to a cell. The court ordered her to pay me $200,000 in restitution for the damage she'd caused. Mark, a colleague who'd been her pawn, faced 2 years behind bars and a $20,000 fine for his role in forging documents. My parents, complicit in their silence, were hit with a civil judgment, ordered to pay $75,000 in damages. Their reputation in our community crumbled, their once proud status eroded by their own choices. I didn't gloat, I felt no joy in their downfall. But I felt relief knowing they could no longer hurt me. I wanted to do more than rebuild my own life. The pain of being betrayed, of being left alone in a hospital bed, had shown me how many others might face similar struggles. I took a bold step, investing $500,000 from my contract earnings into a Denver-based foundation for victims of familial abuse. The fund would provide legal aid, counseling, and safe housing for those escaping toxic families. At the launch event, I spoke to a small crowd, my voice steady. No one should feel alone in their fight. I said the words carrying my own scars. The foundation was my way of turning pain into purpose, ensuring others had the support I'd lacked. As I settled into my new home, I reflected on the journey. My family had tried to erase me, my sister with her schemes, my parents with their indifference. But their actions only made me stronger. I'd fought through a coma, uncovered their lies, and faced them in court. Each step had been a battle, from recording my sister's confession to presenting evidence with my lawyer. I'd learned that justice wasn't just about winning, it was about standing up even when the odds seemed impossible. My algorithm, my pride, was back in my hands, and I was already planning its next phase, determined to make it bigger than ever. The biggest lesson wasn't about revenge or triumph, it was about self-reliance. For years, I'd sought my family's validation, chasing their love through achievements they ignored. But in that hospital bed, abandoned and betrayed, I found something better: my own strength. I didn't need their approval to know my worth. Kien Tree had carried me through the pain, the lies, and the courtroom. It had taught me that no one could take my future unless I let them. As I looked out over Denver, the city lights sparkling below, I knew I was enough. I was ready to build a life on my terms, one where no one could hold me back.